leader of the Uhuru movement and the International African Revolution. I want to talk to you today about Breonna Taylor. Our theme, our slogan is Breonna Taylor, no surrender, no compromise. No compromise, no surrender. So we've just seen on yesterday how the Jefferson County grand jury refused to indict any of the 3 cops that were involved in the murder of Breonna Taylor. The 26-year-old African woman's family, they expressed outrage, and their lawyer, Benjamin Crump, declared that the grand jury ruling success that there are 2 justice systems in the United States. In fact, he was kind of tearful, depending on which of the news outlets you watched him making this very deep and profound pronouncement. There appears to be 2 justice systems, he says. And Crump, he really bemoaned the grand jury outcome that would only indict 1 cop, Hankinson, with wanton endangerment in the 1st degree. And even this indictment was not one that was made for shooting Breonna Taylor. The wanton endangerment that they're talking about is that the cop, this one cop, not any of the others who fired, this one cop fired so recklessly that rounds from his weapon, rounds that he was using to kill Breonna Taylor, went into the apartment of an adjoining white resident of this complex. Not for killing Breonna Taylor, not for shooting Breonna Taylor some 8 times, not even for the rounds that went into the apartment of the African who lived above Breonna Taylor, but the white woman, the white residents rather, who lived in the adjoining apartment, because the bullets went through and into their apartment. This is why Hankinson, the cop who was indicted, not for anything having to do with killing Breonna Taylor, and this must be understood, and I'm sure you do understand it by now, because I know the media have been talking more and more about this. So not for anything having to do with killing Breonna Taylor, they indict Hankinson for wanton endangerment because some rounds that he fired went into the apartment of the white person, the white people who live next door to Breonna Taylor. And then some people complaining, including Crump, criticized that the no-knock warrant that was used to justify the police attack on Taylor's home. They criticized this, and they were saying that it was a faulty no-knock warrant, and this is a major concern for some people. And what happened with the no-knock warrant. And the fact is that this is not a new phenomenon, even though much of the media are treating this no-knock thing as a new thing. It is not. I mean, you can trace it back to the use of the federal government. John Mitchell, who was Attorney General of the United States under Richard Milhous Nixon when he was president, is someone who seriously promoted this no-knock warrant, this no-knock attack by the law enforcement. And this no-knock thing is something that seems to go against constitutional prohibition of police simply coming into somebody's house without notification or something like that. So in order to deal with serious crimes, in order to deal with situations where criminals may destroy evidence, they now come up with this provision of a no-knock. This is 1970 when this was being seriously promoted by John Mitchell in the Richard Milhous Nixon administration. So it goes back at least to that extent. And what was it that promoted it then? It was the Black Revolution of the 60s. It was the need for this government to be able to crash into homes, crash into the apartments like they did Fred Hampton in 1969 at 4 o'clock in the morning in Chicago. When they came into his house, they killed one of the persons who was functioning there as a security right away, and they shot their way into the apartment and killed Fred Hampton in his bed, killed him, wounded other people in that apartment in his bed. No knock, no knock. And this was because it was obviously at this time that it was a war against African people. And many people have forgotten that history, and the media relies on you to have forgotten that history. And many of these people who are lawyers rely on you to have forgotten that history so that you won't connect what happened to Breonna Taylor as something that was designed to deal with and crush and kill and make war against African people. That's where the no-knock law came from. Again, it was in 1970 that Mitchell was on before congressional hearings justifying why they wanted to remove what was supposed to be a constitutional prohibition against police simply coming into somebody's house. So the no-knock warrant is nothing new. And Benjamin Crump ought to know that it is nothing new. And then there's this whole issue about the grand jury. And the fact is that the grand jury, and they took something like 6 months, similar to what they did with Mike Brown in Ferguson, St. Louis. They took 6 months for the grand jury to come to some kind of conclusion. And of course, the objective here was that in 6 months, there was an assumption, just like with Mike Brown, that the tempers would have cooled down, the people would have forgotten that this African had been murdered by the government, and they could come out and with a non-indictment, they can slap the wrist at most, and then nothing would happen as a consequence of that. They protect the system. They protect this arm of the state, the police, which is very precious to them. You know how precious this arm of the police is because you saw even when one of Barack Hussein's buddies who went to the same school, they were brothers from the same university, that when he was arrested in his own home, and Barack Hussein Obama was president, and the cop who arrested him, Obama had the audacity, temerity, to criticize the cop as having done something stupid. And what happened when he made that statement was there was a firestorm of criticism coming from white people that made Barack Obama back up from that, actually have the cop come to his house and have the African who had been invaded and arrested in his home to sit down and have a beer together. They call it the beer summit. And this is a statement about how every aspect of the United States government and most of the white citizens in this country up to now have seen and recognized that the police is a military tool to be used to maintain the status quo, to protect the society, to protect the status quo from African people. That's this role. That's why it's been able to get away with murder up and down the line. And people have been willing to go ahead and overlook it and say that, well, they must have done something wrong for the police to kill them the way that it happened. And so this police, the sanctity of the police, has been something that's been recognized and appreciated up until recently. And of course, up until recently, this whole system has come into crisis. After first, we saw an inkling of it when the police murdered Mike Brown in Ferguson, St. Louis. This was one of the most exciting, one of the most important events in our struggle in the recent period, because we had gone for nearly 3 generations after they crushed the Black Revolution of the 60s, that they killed Malcolm, they killed King, they killed Lumumba, they killed more than a score of Black Panther Party members, they killed the co-founder of the African People's Socialist Party. They were jailing people all around this country and around the world. They killed Lumumba in Africa. They overthrew Nkrumah and then killed him. In West Africa. They killed, after wounding and capturing Che Guevara, they assassinated, they murdered him. They crushed the revolutionary movement, and they put in its place a whole assortment of creatures who now sometimes speak in the name of revolution, speak in the name of the oppressed, but serve the interests of white power and imperialism. This is what they've succeeded in doing and did do so for a long time. But we of the African People's Socialist Party have always understood that the masses of African people would rise up, that you could not suppress the righteous indignation, the righteous drive of Black people to achieve our freedom. That was never going to go away, despite what they had done. And they used what we call techniques of counterinsurgency. A counterinsurgency is something that's employed by oppressor powers, by imperialists, by colonizers, to keep the oppressed from rising up, or to push them down once they have risen up. So they have this whole art and science called counterinsurgency. And they use all forms of warfare. They use economic warfare. They use psychological warfare. They use political warfare. But at their core, the essence of it is military warfare that they use against the people to keep the people oppressed. That's what counterinsurgency does. And the primary strategic components of counterinsurgency is population and resource control. And so they have a public policy in this country. And they have had a public policy in this country since the end of the so-called civil rights movement of police containment. Police containment of the African population is the public policy in this country, and police containment of the peoples of the world is the public policy of US imperialism and all the imperial powers to maintain the status quo. That is the status quo where you have a social system that is based on parasitic colonialism, stealing the wealth, stealing the resources from colonized people around the world and inside this country as well. When I say inside this country, I'm talking about the indigenous people. I'm including the indigenous people who live in the barrios and what have you, on the so-called Indian reservations as they characterize them, and in the colonial ghettos of this country. So this is part of what their project is, because here is where the core of the revolution has always been. And how do you know? If you didn't know for any other reason that it was absolutely necessary for them to suppress the revolution, the revolutionary activity, the revolutionary struggle of African people, then it ought to be clear to you that after what we saw that happen with George Floyd and the resistance stemming from what happened to George Floyd, which came in the wake of what had happened already with Mike Brown, and we saw the courageous people rise up. They were not talking this mealy-mouthed sellout-ism talk that the civil rights people have been talking about. They were not talking about the stuff that these so-called leaders were trying to keep us locked into, not fighting for our oppression, fighting for our liberation as a people, and keeping us locked instead with this relationship, this love lock with the oppressor. This is what the kinds of leadership that came in the consequence of destroying the revolution. This was part of the counterinsurgency. And so sometimes what people thought they were seeing, subsequent to the defeat of our revolution, what they thought they were seeing is an advancement of our struggle, because they had some Negroes who put in some high places. They were put in very respectable and responsible places. They thought that was some kind of advancement for our people, when in fact what it meant was that our struggle had been taken over by the bourgeoisie, by the imperialists, by white power in blackface. And so they did everything they could to just lock us into this relationship so that we would have confidence in the social system that was killing us, that was murdering us. And this whole notion about somehow the grand jury is supposed to give justice to us is part of that. I mean, when you look at the guy who is the Attorney General for the state of Kentucky, Daniel Cameron, he is an officer of the court. And Benjamin Crump is an officer of the court. And both of them are feigning near tears and what have you because of the outcome of what happened with Breonna Taylor. You have this man, Cameron, who is a darling of the Republican Party, spoke at the Republican National Convention for Donald Trump and what have you. And they've held him up. He's a silver-tongued enemy of our people, but he represents the same system. He wants to keep us locked in the same system. And you have a situation where a sector of the ruling class has one strategy in terms of keeping us locked into the system, protecting the status quo, and another sector of the white power of the right ruling class has another strategy in doing that. One would use oppression and shoot us into compliance, and another would seduce us into compliance. The fact is that we are no closer to freedom. We were no closer to freedom under Obama than we are today under Trump. And we just have different strategies being used to maintain our relationship to a foul social system that cannot exist except for the oppression of African and other colonized peoples around the world. That's what we're looking at. So here we have this very serious situation. And what we're saying is that people are crying in the streets of Louisville, Kentucky. They bemoaning what has happened. They can't believe it. Some in disbelief, some just in anguish, some in anger of what has just happened. What has happened? Of course, the part of the disbelief and part of the way the anger is coming about is because of some element of confidence in the system, some element of confidence that the social system would do right by us. We have what they have demanded, peaceful demonstrations, and maybe the system will do right by us. We have a lot of people who come out, but that hasn't been the case. I was looking at an article that was in yesterday's Washington Post that up to today, something more than 1,000 people have been killed by police in this country. And even though something like half of them have been white, the vast majority in terms of population proportion have been Africans and what they call Hispanics. These are Spanish-speaking colonized people in this country. So that for white people, the police have killed something like 13 persons per every million. For Spanish-speaking colonized subjects, they've killed 24 people for every 1 million. And for Africans, they have killed 32 people for every 1 million Africans who are in this country. And this is a serious miscount when it comes to Africans. Because as you know, some Africans are Spanish speaking also, and they've labeled them this horrible description as Hispanic because they speak Spanish. But of course, none of the people who they call Hispanic is Spanish. The fact is that Spanish people are white. So the point that we will make at this juncture, and something that all of these lessons, all of this stuff that's happening to us should help us to understand, is that the only way out of this is revolution. We can't get out of this situation without revolution. We have to separate ourselves from the system, and we have to separate ourselves from the ruling class. We can't simply do the kinds of things that we did in the 1960s. And this is not to say that we cannot engage in struggle for democratic rights. We can engage in struggle for democratic rights. But this time, the struggle for democratic rights cannot be under the leadership of the African petty bourgeoisie, of the middle class, who had us crawling around begging white power for rights, who told us that we had to be nonviolent and peaceful and respect the system and stuff like that, who told us that the main solution, the main way out of here was through the electoral process. We cannot allow the petty bourgeoisie to describe and define for us what this struggle for democratic rights has to be. We have to expand the definition of democratic rights. And this is something that can only happen under the leadership of the African working class, the African people, the majority of whom are being shot down in these streets, like Breonna, shot in her own home from the African working class. And the African working class today finally has our own party in the form of the African People's Socialist Party. And that's when we say no compromise, no surrender. We cannot retreat. We cannot go back to some civil rights era. We cannot act like the civil rights movement did not happen. We cannot put ourselves in a situation where the African petty bourgeoisie can lead our movement, because their solution is different from our solution. They will find the solution, if they can, within the existing social system. That's why they claim stuff like Black Lives Matter. They won't make a demand. They just go out and say Black Lives Matter. And then there's sectors of the petty bourgeoisie who work with us. When I say us, I'm talking about within the context of the so-called national liberation movement, or the so-called self-determination movement, or the so-called anti-imperialist movement. They too say, well, we have to lock in with them and say Black Lives Matter, and not take the struggle any further than that. And to simply say Black Lives Matter is to unite with the bourgeoisie. It's to unite with the colonial system itself. That's not what we're trying to do. The people have to be taken beyond the system, and we have to begin to understand that we have to rely on ourselves as African working class, African people, to liberate ourselves from this colonial domination by a foreign, alien, hostile entity that kills us every day, whether it's the police or some other means by which they are destroying our lives and our future here in this country and around the world. And of course, this makes us come and have this in common with the vast majority of the people around the world who are being afflicted with the consequences of colonial capitalism, US imperialism. So we say that this is what we have to do. We have to make revolution. There's no other way out of here. And so I know that that frightens a lot of people when we say that, because these are people who have no sense of tactics and strategy. And of course, the African petty bourgeoisie, and however militant they may sound, scared to death of the concept of revolution, scared to death of the African working class, who is the only social force that can be relied on to lead a revolutionary movement. The only social force that has been consistently revolutionary in this country and around the world, the working class, the poor peasants of the world. And this is what the party, African People's Social Party, represents. And everything that we do carries out the strategic objective to replacing colonialism, to replace colonial power with the power of the people, and more specifically, the power of the people under the leadership of the African working class. That's what has to happen. That's what we've been working for. So some people are scared to death when we say this. I'm talking about ordinary people. I'm not talking about charlatans and opportunists and hustlers and people who are careerists, who would simply use the revolution and use the struggle of the people to promote their own careers. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about people who are the haters of the revolution and come up with specious arguments that will attack the leadership of the revolution so that they don't have to justify the fact that they're in bed with white power. I'm not talking about those forces. I'm talking about ordinary people. And some people are afraid when we say revolution, 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 and they say it's so dangerous and that that you can die, and they have more guns than what we have. We don't have the guns they have, and it's true. We don't have the guns that they have. And if it were simply a matter of who's got the most guns, then of course it would not make sense to try to make the struggle. But that's not exactly what it's all about. Because what we are living with right now, we understand the nature of the social system. We understand what built it. We understand what holds it together. We understand that it is a social system that relies on being able forever to suck the blood, suck the resources from Africa and the oppressed peoples around the world. And what we are seeing everywhere is where people are struggling and having severe consequences inside the United States, deepening crisis in the United States, in Europe, and what have you, where people are taking back their resources or putting up such a movement that challenges the stability of the system because they can't rely on those resources being sucked. The parasite cannot rely on the being able to suck the resources from the host. And we see growing crisis happening everywhere. And we've seen over the last period of time, we know that we've reached a critical point in history and the development of the struggle of the peoples in this country and around the world. We've seen that the economy of this country is in the dumps. We've seen that this horrible economic outcome has been exacerbated by the colonial virus, by COVID-19. We've seen that what they've called the essential workers are the critical workers. They call them essential workers as though we were trash. We're the ones who pick up the trash. We're the ones who do the dirty work for them. And we've always been the essential workers. That's what slavery was. That's what colonialism is. We are the essential workers. And then we see what is happening with the supply lines across the country, Aurora being disrupted by COVID-19. This has exacerbated the crisis. And we see the US is in worse shape than as the great power. It is in worse shape with the main contender, which is China. China has recovered more or less from this. China's economy is growing lickety split at a time where the US is doing everything it can to block China's growth. This is one of the contending forces that the United States has to deal with. This contributes to the crisis of imperialism that we're talking about. We're not just going up against some powerful enemy that has all the guns and all the muscle and all the prestige. It has no longer prestige. But peoples around the world are looking for alternatives to the United States government, looking to alternative to the social system that's offered up by the United States government and by Europe. And so it is a serious crisis. The crisis that we're talking about, you have wildfires sweeping the West inside this country. More than 5 million acres, a territory larger than the state of Connecticut, on fire now. Escalating crisis that we have, that you see happening in this country. We have a crisis where the legitimacy of the basic and fundamental institutions of this country is being called into question, not by me, not necessarily by the African People's Socialist Party and African International, but ordinary people in this country are challenging the legitimacy of the social system. At a time when just a few years ago, all the white people and everybody could unite with what the police were doing. And this was really important for the social system to have them uniting with the police were doing. Today, people are challenging that, and some of them are burning down police stations, and they're in the streets. Millions of them have been in the streets, people who have never protested before. And why have they done that? Because of the leadership of the African working class, because of the workers who rose up especially after they murdered George Floyd in Minneapolis. And so people are rising up, and they're following the leadership of the primary revolutionary force in this country and the world. This is what we're looking at. There's a crisis that's here. And you must understand the nature of the crisis, because the whole social system is in a state of disintegration, to the extent that, as I mentioned earlier, that the United States had had all this prestige, it doesn't have it anymore. People are looking at the United States as a weak sister. People are looking at the United States with pity. This is one of the things that you're beginning to read coming from the representatives of the ruling class themselves, and writing about it. They're saying that people no longer respect the United States. Even when you look at what's happening in Africa today, we got Macron, who is the president of France, a country that in ordinary circumstances would be no more than a fourth-rate country, but has achieved some kind of esteem and significance because it was able to rape Haiti for long periods of time. Haiti fed France because it controls something like 14 different so-called countries in Africa today. Africa feeds France, and because it's this the struggle, this parasitic relationship that France has to the rest of us, just like the rest of capitalism that sustains France at our expense. And so now people are rising up, and the United States no longer has the prestige, and France is calling for a European African army to be able to control African people in the territories that France claims as its own. And of course, when they talk about a European African army, you can bet they're talking about colonized people like ourselves, who speak French, who live under French domination, functioning as their arm to do this. So I want to say that there's economic disaster, stock market crashing, the U.S. prestige on the decline, and you have all these kinds of things that contribute to the crisis of the social system. China rising up, challenging on every front. Russia becoming a main contender, and fear about sectors of the ruling class that the Trump might not even leave office after the election. Then, of course, you've got an election that's supposed to be over on the 3rd, but may very well not be over on the 3rd. This may be an unending election that we are looking at today. This is nothing but crisis. We say revolution, not because we got the most guns, but because we understand the nature of the social system, and the social system is in a state of distress. And it's our responsibility to take advantage of that, to free ourselves from it and not to lock ourselves into it. I quoted on yesterday an article that was in the Wall Street Journal. And this article talked about how this nasty, revealing battle of the Supreme Court. And it is nasty because now we see this notion of this impartial institution that's above the political fray, that will render justice to all, being revealed for what it really is, simply an instrument in the possession of one sector of the ruling class or another at any given time. It supports capitalism and colonialism in general, but one sector of the ruling class at any given time. And that's what you're seeing about this woman, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who they call RBG, but we know the RBG is red, black, and green, and that's ours, and Ruth can't have that. But before her body's even cold, you see the Democrats and the Republicans fighting, talking about who's going to replace her, and to whose advantage is it going to be that she's dead, and that they have an opportunity to do something about it. And Trump saying that he needs to replace her himself because this election is going to be crazy, and he's going to need somebody in the Supreme Court that will be able to put him in power, just like it happened with Bush and Gore and the cowardly Gore in 2000, in the election of 2000. So this is what the Wall Street Journal says, and I'm going to be through. It says that, talking about the Supreme Court, it says that what is becoming clear is that political power rather than principle is becoming the key variable in shaping the nation's highest court. Political power, political power. It says the positive news, however, is that the Supreme Court, by the way it has conducted its business, appears to have maintained a good share of public confidence. In the Gallup poll's annual survey of confidence in American institutions, those expressing a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in the Supreme Court has declined from 52% at the time of 1987 to 40% today. So 40%, they say it's good news. 40% of the people in this country think that they have a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in the Supreme Court. And then other institutions have feared worse. Confidence in Congress, the presidency, big business, banks, newspapers, and television news has declined over the last 2 decades. Confidence in Congress, where the fight over the Ginsburg vacancy is about to play out, stands at a mere 13%. And in today's angry, polarized, and populist era, a whole new set of national institutions has come under fire. Some have been attacked by President Trump and his supporters as part of a deep state establishment opposing him. Some are under attack by liberals as a vestige of a racist society, and some are simply caught in today's partisan crossfire. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, because of its handling of both Hillary Clinton's email controversy and questions of Russian actions to benefit Mr. Trump during the 2016 presidential campaign, has received the enmity of both parties. An institution once considered above the partisan fray now is part of it. Both the State Department's Foreign Service and staff of the White House National Security Council, long considered nonpartisan bastions of professionalism, have also been sucked into the partisan furor. And anyway, what it says ultimately is that amid it all, the death of George Floyd and at police hands in Minneapolis has set off not just a debate about vestiges of racism in American institutions generally, but a specific attack on local police departments, including calls to cut their taxpayer funding. What all these institutions have in common is that they have helped hold together America and its government through tough times and periods of political turmoil. Their ability to continue to do so is under renewed test. So this is part of the crisis that's represented by the Wall Street Journal. And I think that's really important for us to recognize when we talk about revolution. We're talking about the system itself in a state of decay, the system itself in a place of downfall. And so I wanted to share this with you and say that revolution is the only way. And we're not going to be able to compromise our way out of this. We're not going to be able to lock arms with neo-colonial forces who want to stay in bed with imperialism, or somehow, if we can trick them to thinking that we're all right, that it's going to be okay too. That's part of the contradiction we're facing with. It's not going to happen that way. And we're not going to be able to bluff them, the bourgeoisie, into giving us some kind of freedom. This whole notion of justice or else, that's not going to work. You can, or else if you want to, they can't bring justice to us. And the whole thing about somehow protest alone won't do it. Yes, protest, but it won't do it alone. Not even protests of armed men and women who march down the streets and what have you will do it alone. They can't be bluffed. The social system is in a state of destabilization, a state of decay. And revolutionary strategy helps us to move forward. That's why it's necessary to join with the African People's Socialist Party, to engage in struggle that is, as we make the struggle, we build and institutionalize the capacity to negate the significance of white power, and negate the significance of colonialism in our house, in our existence, in our spaces. And that means that we have to become totally free not just here in the United States, because we can't do it by ourselves in the United States. As Africans, we have to recognize that the African revolution is worldwide, it's global, it's wherever we are. That gives us a strategic character wherever we're located. That's why the African People's Socialist Party is all over Africa. That's why, just like the bourgeoisie, just like the imperialist enemies, just why the African People's Socialist Party is throughout the Caribbean. That's why the African People's Socialist Party is organizing throughout Europe and have organizations in Europe and throughout the United States, because it's going to take a worldwide revolutionary movement to do it, just like Garvey had created in the past. And when we talk about democracy, this whole notion that somehow you're going to get democracy from the social system that was founded on your slavery, that requires your continued enslavement as a condition for its continued success, that somehow you're going to get democracy from that. Only leaders who want to keep us locked into a horrible situation will preach that to us. The fact is that we're going to have to disengage and find different methods of disengagement that will contribute to the liberation of our people. Democracy, then, for us, the highest expression of democracy for us is self-determination, is the struggle for self-determination. That's why we do our own do our own grand jurors, and that's why we do our own courts, and that's why we move to get masses of people organized to take Black community control of the police. And I just want to say this to you in closing. Years ago, Gil Scott-Heron did a poem about no-knock law. And it says something that you explained to me, I must admit, but just for the record, you're talking stuff, rhymes with. Long rapped about no-knock being legislated for the people you've always hated. In this hellhole that we call home. No knock, the man will say, to keep the man from beating his wife. No knock, the man will say, to protect people from themselves. No knocking, head rocking, enter shocking, shooting, cussing, killing, crying, lying, and being white. No knock. No knock to my brother Fred Hampton, bullet holes all over the place. No knock to my brother Michael Harris, and jam the shotgun against his skull. For my protection, who's gonna protect me from you, the likes of you, the nerve of you, to talk that stuff face to face? Your tomato face deadpan, you're a deadpan, deadening another freedom plan. No knocking, head rocking, enter, shocking, shooting, cussing, killing, crying, lying, and being white. No knock. But if you're wise, no knocker, you'll tell your no knocking like it's hot. No knock on my brother's head. No knock on my sister's head, no knock on my brother's heads, no knock on my sister's heads, and double lock your door, because soon someone may be no knocking, ha ha, for you. The revolution is the only solution. No compromise, no surrender. Breonna Taylor, you've got people like Kamala Harris saying, call her name, and you've got other people saying, call her name and what have you. And what we say is that we're going to have to build revolution so there won't be any more. We're going to have to take power in our own hands, and we're going to have to win masses of people to make the step to separate. It means that revolutionaries, that members and African nationalists of our party and the Uhuru movement are going to have to be engaged in these struggles of the people, the spontaneous struggles of the people, to take them to a higher level by which we mean helping winning people away from some kind of reliance and dependency on the social system that's responsible for our misery. Winning people to join the work by the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement to defeat colonialism and to win the liberation of our people. Winning whites to understand that there is not going to be any end of this capitalism that you say sometimes that you hate without destroying the colonial pedestal upon which it rests. We say that there should be, for Breonna Harris, for our people, for the African nation at large, no compromise, no surrender. Uhuru.